Oh my God, Professor, thank you so much for coming on Northern Vibe and speaking to the good people of far North Queensland and my other viewers spread far and wide. I'm pretty excited about this.
Hey, thank you for having me.
No,
I,
no
I
worries.
spend a lot of virtual time in Australia. You know, I have a podcast of my own. My co-host is over on your side of the planet.
How did you become a fencing bear at prayer?
Oh, I have my toy. I should have brought it to the camera, but she's upstairs, and so she doesn't get to be on this. Um, so I started fencing about 20 years ago, 2003. And I was very interested at that time in monastic metaphors of prayer. And a lot of them were very military because in the Psalms, there's, language about putting on, maybe that's in Ephesians, but putting on the armor of God. But there's language in the Psalms about fighting our enemies and praying for help from the Lord of hosts. And European monastics, Benedictine monastics, took these metaphors very seriously when they were talking about what kind of prayer they were doing. So I'm a very practical person. I like finding out where metaphors actually live. So I decided I needed to learn to do some sword play. So that's fencing bear, because I actually have competed as a fencer for some years, many years actually. And at prayer, because it was a practice in service of also understanding our spiritual journey.
Yeah, that's so true. Obviously, that's something that Christianity holds in common with the Zen and the other warrior religions. You know, the kind of samurai and that kind of stuff. But where does the bear symbolism come in?
Well, that's what I'm joking about with the toy. Back in I think I got the toy in 2005. The toys, I say she, and then I get chided because I'm like anthropomorphizing my own avatar. Anyway, the toy I got at a Summer Nationals I think it was in Sacramento in 2005, and I had just done horrendously badly. That was only the second time I'd competed at that national level, and I was not much of a fencer. It was only 2 years in, and I was so mad at myself that I had done so badly. And I got this bear, and it's a little toy. She's about like this, right? It's a little, I don't know. It's not even a very fancy teddy bear. And there was a woman at the tournament who had made clothes for them, and so it gave her a little mask and a little foil and everything, and was putting their names on the people. The kids that were getting them were putting their names on the back of the costumes on the dolls. And so once I put my name on the back of the fencing bear, I said, okay, it doesn't matter that I lost. I need to figure out how to do this. I mean, I was actually really, really upset. And it's like saying that I was sort of owning fencing bear at prayer the fencing bear was owning my desire to get better at this thing that I was absolutely dreadful at. I'm holding my rosary now because it helps me concentrate when we're talking. That the fencing bear toy helped me concentrate on learning the thing that I was bad at. And I realized I've been meditating also on the way in which I use masks and sort of characters and such. It helped me dissociate from that crushing sense of failure that I carried around for having done so badly. And the blog that Fencing Bear at Prayer lives at is, though 3 years on, the meditations that I was having about what I was learning from fencing as a spiritual practice.
I mean, it strikes me that you're the kind of professor that other academics warn people about.
That's what I say on my homepage, right?
I've done my research, Prof. I've done my research.
I'm happy. That makes me happy. So, I mean, I was that fencing bear at prayer long before I was Catholic. That I've been on this particular practical journey some decades, and I'd say, I like to try on the questions that I have. We're going to get this sense of symbolism needs to be alive. You don't just look at an image and think about it abstractly. It's like it's something embodied and incarnate. I'd say I'm not really a political person. Like, you get swept up in the politics because the politics became so spiritually challenging in the last several years. But I have more difficulty in academia because I'm just so practical. It's like we have jokes at the University of Chicago about that's okay in practice. How does it work in theory? Right, reverse. That what I want to see how the theory interacts with the practice and vice versa. And I'd say that has been a more challenging aspect of my scholarship for most of my academic colleagues than anything else. I say, and for example, my newest book, Mary and the Art of Prayer, that I wanted to learn to pray like a medieval Christian. And so I'm going to take you inside of their practice. And academics don't tend to like that. They don't want to be inside of other people's heads very actively, even though we say that we're supposed to be like looking for empathy with the other and such. It's not something that most academics are terrifically comfortable with.
I'm not an academic. I haven't got a degree. I didn't even really go to university. But like, I have a deep admiration for, the idea of university learning. And I used to walk around when I lived in Brisbane, which is our state capital. Queensland University, it's this beautiful sandstone, and you can feel the learning coming out of the stones. It's just, but how did we get to this complete and utter disassociation between academia and practicality, and this weird, I don't know, this weird vibe that's kind of like going on with academia right now? Like, I don't recognize those people when I see them on television. They weren't the same people that were talking in the 80s and in the 70s. And it's not as if there weren't some very radical people, lecturing around then, but there seems to have been something lost. And I'd like you to, what is it?
Well, Christ. But now you know why I get really in trouble in academia.
The Logos, of course.
So,
of course.
Yes, no, it's interesting you say that you feel the vibe from the stones, because the University of Chicago is architecturally, very medieval. And many American college campuses from the late 19th, early 20th century they adopted this sort of medieval aesthetic, and the purpose that the people who chose those architectural plans gave was they wanted the students to have that feeling of being in this sort of contemplative environment, and therefore it's like we basically teach in Disneyland or Hogwarts, right? That the buildings are purposely constructed to give you a particular kind of experience within the architecture. Now, I'm actually completely sympathetic to that, because I think architecture is one of the most important expressions of our humanity, and therefore the buildings that we build work back on us, right? But we'll go to Marshall McLuhan and media effects in a bit if you want to. But yes. I think so. What's happened in academia, it's curious, because the other thing that came out of the University of Chicago, or at least in that environs, was Dewey and his educational experiments. And I'm in sort of two minds about Dewey, because on the one hand, he's just practical, right? He was saying that students needed to have hands-on experience, and the laboratory school that we have associated with the University of Chicago is very sort of practical in the kinds of exercises that it gives its students. But on the other hand, Dewey was also the early progressives, and those early progressives with their disdain for the actual common man and the actual the development of souls, that we're all going to become machine worthy and industrial workers, something like that,
or Nietzsche and super people.
Well, but yeah, the super the super people never want other super people around, right? They want to feel like they're the only super people. And so any project that they claim that they're doing that's going to involve everybody, the involving everybody means turning us all into sheep or something like that. So, I think the strongest argument I have, and it might take a while to develop that, and I'm not sure we want to do that particular problem, but I say, unless we're being educated within an incarnational understanding, as body and soul, therefore our sciences are also about praising God, our art is about praising God. If that breaks and falls apart, we end up serving the world, and therefore I guess the most idea-centric entities we have are the demons that hate us because we're embodied. How about that?
No, and that's great. The thing I love about this, though, and Peugeot talks about this a bit, is all of this stuff has actually, it's bringing back symbolism, and it's bringing back now. So we can actually now use language like incarnation, like symbolism and stuff like that. Now, it's true that I would say 60, maybe 70% of people would sit there and go, what is he talking about? Well, what are they talking about? Or they would have very different ideas as what we mean by incarnation. But at least now we're having the discussion again. And I think that that's so important. So perhaps
Well, let me just, so it's that Jonathan Peugeot, and you saw me on his videos, right, that he's an artist. And I asked him at one point, you know, how he came to a lot of the understanding, the insight that he had in about Mary, or, you know, the Christian theology. And he said he it's from doing the images, it's from his carving. And that makes a lot of sense to me, that he's engaged with the stone that he's working on. He says he chose a stone that's close to ivory because ivory is not available, and it, you know, so he's trying to replicate the Orthodox style ivories, and it's in the carving itself that he comes to the understanding of the symbolism. This makes beautiful sense to me, and I'd say that, as you know, as Catholics, it's a similar sort of practice. Like I said, I'm fencing because I wanted to understand physically embodied, you know, frustrations that challenge my soul. And I think similarly, our education in language, in mathematics, in science should be, you know, embodied understanding of our spiritual existence. So these things have to go together.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And that actually links back to the thing you were saying before, like it's the loss of the logos that's causing all this. And I think Chesterton actually articulated that pretty well when he said it's, you know, when people stop believing in God, it's not that they believe in nothing, it's they'll believe absolutely anything.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But I mean, we just, as Christians, have to say, it's true. We live for Christ. That's it. If we're not living in Christ, we're serving the world. Serving the world has all of these ramifications, which the idea that I want to get across here, you asked about, it's like, why are we so idea centric? Look at, so on the one hand, it's like, okay, we're sort of industrialized and we're wanting to, you know, serve machine world and such like that. But the ideal of the sort of progressive project is to de-incarnate us, that we should, you know, think of ourselves as fully ourselves insofar as we could download our brain into a computer. Well, one, then we're incarnate in silicon instead of carbon. Yeah. But the you know, we're going to be incarnate somewhere, unless we're angels or demons. That the huge project that it seems the world is in, if we're serving the world, is becoming disincarnate, and that is not what we are. We understand our proper existence to be, if we're Christian.
Oh my God, yeah. I never really considered it that way. Disincarnation. That makes, now that you've articulated it, that makes perfect sense. But can we also, for lay people who are going to be listening, and you know, if you are a lay person, you've stayed with us so far, thank you so much. Let's explain symbolism. And I'd like to lead to make sure that because when I'm trying to explain this and I'm having conversations, you know, with my friends and at work and stuff like that, they go, you know, what is this symbolism you're talking about all the time, you know, Matt? And first, you know, the first and simplest concept that I used to use was the idea of numbers. It's like, well, you know, show me 5. Where's 5? You know, people hold up 5 fingers. It's, no, that's 5 fingers. Maybe they draw the symbol for 5 and go, no, that's the symbol of 5. So then they get some idea of it. But it kind of goes deeper than that. And people, they still don't really get it. So I say to people, I go, what's bread? And I go, well, from the materialist point of view, it's these chemicals put together in this certain way, mixed in this certain way, given this certain temperature, and you can describe it at, you know, many different levels and say, well, that is what bread is. And that's true. It's not that that's not a degree of truth to that. And, you know, no one is denying the science around it. But what bread is nourishment. That's how you experience bread. So when Christians and other people we're talking about, give us this day our daily bread, we mean nourishment. But we don't just mean nourishment in the sense of physical nourishment, although we do mean that. But it's like, think of it in the terms, and what I said this to someone the other day. I said, you know, think of it in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So you're nourishing all of that at the same time. That's what we talk about when we talk about bread. Now, I think I'm on the right track there. Can you tell me, because you're kind of expert on this, can you tell me if I've got that right and I'm explaining it, and would you care to add anything to that?
Well, I'm going to say it differently, which isn't to say what you said is wrong. But I mentioned Marshall McLuhan just as an aside, and it's like, let's go there, right? So McLuhan is famous for his phrase, "The medium is the message," and that we experience the sort of media world that we're in. Like, you're in electric lights all the time, and it's another thing he says: the electric light is pure information. If you recognize how much simply having electric lights changes our environment completely. He said that his central insight was that all media changes in similar ways, like this that we're doing on. We're talking to each other through fiber optic cables at light speed.
It's amazing.
and it's like it's this magic sort of thing. And he also came up with this term of the global village, that we are somehow within, because of this electrified network of media that we now inhabit, a single entity that we exist in as the planet. But what's curious about this is he actually came to that level of understanding, not from thinking about electricity primarily, but from studying medieval education, the trivium, right? The arts of grammar and rhetoric and logic. And in studying the arts of the language, he came across the way in which medieval monastics read the scriptures as having different layers of meaning. And this is getting to your symbolism question, right? Because I think in modernity, in the 19th, 20th century, when symbolism as a sort of poetic concept became very, very popular, you have things like I don't know, Yeats and the poets of the early 20th century. They're thinking, they have an idea of symbolism that it's sort of it's more than just signs that mark meaning, but the symbols have this reality that points to other things. And that it's like, when I think about symbolism, I kind of come up blank, because I think they mean something slightly different from what I understand. What I understand is what McLuhan discovered in his study of these language arts, which is, when we read scripture, when we read a text, it speaks to us on a number of different levels. And you gave the example just now of bread in the Our Father. You can have the historical level, the literal level, there's bread. You can have an allegorical level that's, I think, what people sometimes would think of symbolism, right? It's like it points to a meaning in Christ, particularly between the Old Testament and the New Testament. You can have a moral level, so saying, the bread that is Christ is also nourishment for our souls, which is a sort of moral experience. And then an anagogical or contemplative one, saying, that the bread would be pointing us to heaven in some way, that you could contemplate it. And that is the way the ancient and medieval Christians thought of meaning, right? That it happens on all of these different layers, because you're in this, going back to McLuhan, you're in this kind of resonating environment that exists on multiple levels of understanding and cause and reality. When I think of symbolism, therefore, I'm really not thinking of it just in terms of the poets when they're talking about green as a symbol or something like that. It's like it's this whole resonating problem of God speaking to us, and it comes through the scriptures, but it also comes through the created world. And when you start working at that level, you're starting both poetry and created reality. But most of the time by now, I've lost people, right? Your minds are blown, because we're not practiced enough at seeing the world that we live in as a creature. It's actually real, it's historically real, but it also points us to these other layers of understanding. Does that make sense?
It does to me.
Okay.
But I can understanding that, I can understand why people are falling into pantheism more and more now today. Because they kind of like, they have this, oh, well, you just said it's a living thing. What I mean by that, you know what I mean? I kind of, and these concepts are so deep, but it really points to this strange idea that I get now when you're talking to people and they go, well, those ridiculous medieval people, they're just so superstitious, so stupid. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't understand the world through their worldview was not shaped by the lens of science. And yes, it's true, but we've actually lost something. There are perceptions and understandings that they had that we don't have, that we need, that are true. And that is not to deny the reality. And because like I'm a science geek, like if you go through some of my other interviews, some of the, the geekiest scientists people, it's so cool having those discussions. But when it comes down, they always stumble when it comes to meaning, because that's something that, it's the eye looking at itself. It's conscious discussing itself. You're always going to hit that. You go right up to this point, all of it's beautiful. And I enjoy reading Dawkins. Like the insights that I got from reading, when he was talking about memes, and I was like, and the way I understood it, was like, I'm not academically trained, it was probably wrong. His fundamental argument was this: there is a way that human beings transfer information down through the generations, and it's not material. Call it culture, call it what you wish, but there is some way, there is like a folk memory, there is some way that people understand things that transcends genetics. And I was like, I nearly fell off my chair when I was kind of like, when I finally came to that realization. Well, that's how I interpreted his work. And again, like if the good professor was here, like probably hit me over the head and inform me that I'm a retrograde Catholic idiot.
Yeah. Okay. So I actually was right in sensing that we could go to Marshall McLuhan and this would help, right? Okay. So so I've given you that McLuhan starts with this recognition of this multiplicity of meaning, and that the people that are most interested in that in the medieval educational practice are the grammarians. Like they're encyclopedists, they're poets, they're the monastic commentators that I, was reading when I started wanting to learn defense, right? And that when you're thinking grammatically like that, you're thinking in terms of taxonomies and descriptions, and meaning comes out of the fullness of description, which is therefore very poetic. But that way of thinking, the grammatical way of thinking, comes into conflict, particularly from the 12th century, with the dialectic, the scholastic. Dare we say the scientific? No, we don't, because it's not quite that. The dialectic is going to be syllogistic proofs, which the poetic does not do, right? If I'm trying to explain to you something that's metaphorically like, I want to learn defense because this will help me with my spiritual training because that's the way my soul trains, the dialectician is like, you're nuts. And so one of the things that McLuhan understood was the battle that we have, and you were asking about the battle in academia, right? It's not really arts versus sciences. It's more within the arts, grammar versus dialectic. Okay. So that's part of it. But then within the scholastic understanding of dialectic, they're working very much with Aristotle. And Aristotle, of course, and then Thomas Aquinas picks that up as well. That Aquinas and via Aristotle thinks not in terms of causation simply in the way we now think of as scientific arguments, right? You said you talk to scientists and they can't explain why. They don't get meaning. They get the efficient cause, the material cause, the stuff that things are made in, the efficient cause. So, billiard balls banging around, but they lose two others. They lose the other two, the formal and final cause. So the final cause would be the meaning of things, right? Why? Modern science does not ask why. I mean, that gets, shunted onto these political projects of saying, well, why? Well, because we want everybody peaceful, right? What was dead is peaceful. So, okay, fine. But what McLuhan got interested in with the media experiences is in fact the fourth of those, which is formal cause, the shaping of the consciousness. And Dawkins with his memes, he's actually, I think, he's touching on some of the same things that McLuhan got to when he's looking at media. He's showing the way in which once you're surrounded by this image structure, and like I'm in my mom's basement with lots of images around me, right? It works on you. So what I see, it's less of a mystery why these memes would perpetuate. They're surrounding us constantly in art, in architecture, in language. It's all of our artifacts working back on us, which is what McLuhan meant by the medium is the message.
Yeah.
So you see that it's so we got these layers, right? It's the language arts, it's the grammar versus the dialecticians, and rhetoric gets involved in both of those. And then within dialectic, a splitting off of the fullness of explanation in terms of causality. And we're in this very, sort of pathetic and thin moment in academic thinking, because the scientists really only do efficient and material cause. They have no capacity whatsoever for thinking about formal or final, therefore meaning or effects. And the academic and the humanities people don't think enough about mathematics typically, and don't they're not terrifically well grounded, I think, in the physical. So there, we've solved it.
Yeah. And one of my other great interviews actually was an Aristotle. I never pronounce this correctly. It's my terrible fun with Queensland accent. An Aristotelian realist, a chap named James Franklin, who, that was, if you want your mind bent, have a chat with that guy. But you medieval scholars have got a little bit to answer for, really, don't you? It was either Derrida or Foucault was a medievalist, wasn't
he? So yes, they were. And I do not accept this calumny that you're casting on my field. What happened is, yes, all of these guys were medievalists, Derrida and Bourdieu and Lacan and Barthes. What they were French, trained as medievalists. Bourdieu, I think, is my favorite still, because he gets, the Aristotelian habitus kind of thing. Barthes is the funniest to me, because he reads, particularly Henri de Lubac's medieval exegesis, reproduces what I was just describing, the 4 levels of scripture that McLuhan also studied. Barthes, says, oh, look, there's polysemy in texts. And then he writes his things on how texts have multiple meanings and stuff. But he doesn't acknowledge that he was getting this from studying about how to read medieval scripture. So they're like medievalists who refuse to acknowledge that that's how they got to their insights. And they just claim to be, brilliant. Well, actually they didn't. They sort of, when the Americans pick them up, they don't realize how Catholic and medieval these guys' background was.
Yeah.
Foucault is simply an early modernist, and well, as we've learned more recently, more overtly, right? He's to a certain extent, with his history, self-justifying his own sexuality.
Yeah, and I spoke to someone who's trained in Foucault, actually, to try and get my head around the thought, because I'd always been kind of different about it. And I think one insight that he had, and we're way off topic now, but anyway, one of the insights that he had that I think is brilliant and spot on is that, we've always had this idea of like, follow the money, like who benefits. But the who benefits has always been like from a material sense. And he was like saying, no, it's deeper than that. People will do stuff for titles. People will do stuff because they get power. People, do stuff. It's like, when you say, who benefits, it's a little bit, you got to look at the power dynamics surrounding that, which I think was a brilliant insight. But look, okay, I really want to get into Mother Mary. And that was, in fact, one of the kind of like points of me getting out to you. But before that, even, how can it be that mischief making is at the heart of Christian virtue? Because you are. I've done my research. You're full of
mischief making, of course it is. Well, I mean, you've mentioned Chesterton, and some of what Milo and I have as the motto, "Risus et bellum," laughter and war, is from Chesterton. That Chesterton understood all those paradoxes, that the more, that Christianity is ultimately the most rational because it believes in the mysteries. I think it goes to the recognition that Christ is the stumbling block for human ambition. And that's the way he's described, and Paul describes him as, a stumbling block for the Greeks, which is a scandal and a stumbling block. That Christ in antiquity confounds both the philosophers, the Greeks, and the Pharisees, or the what we'll call rabbis now, and that both of them, the philosophers trying to live according to this logic without joy, I suppose. That's Chesterton does that too, right? Saying you really want to be pagan, they're really gloomy. And that Christianity is about love, and that, being beloved of God. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees, as Jesus found in his challenge to them, were always about worrying about the, whether or not you're keeping to those rules. That Jesus says, no, they're made for us because God loves us, not because you have to live according to these, like, to earn. And I think in all respects, Christianity is recognizing that we can't earn our favor with God. He loves us already. What we can do is prevent ourselves from being in proper relationship with him. And Jesus did a lot of mischievous things to prove that.
That's totally spot on too. And I'm actually very good friends with the local rabbi. And yeah, look, I don't mind admitting openly that I'm a student of his. And the more I talk to him, the more I go to his classes, the more I'm convinced that Jesus was the guy. That was the guy.
He's our rabbi.
He's
it's like, think what Mary Magdalene calls him when she sees him in the garden after the resurrection. She says Rabboni. So we recognize him as our teacher, but in his performances, and he constantly did mischievous things. I mean, there's the overturning of the temple, the money changers in the temple, but there's also other ways where he's showing the way in which the logic problems can be broken as tricks, because they're sort of traps that we are not. They're not about God's love for us. They're about, I guess, to a certain extent, that some of the problems becomes a magic trick problem. If I do this particular operation, will it have this effect? And the more you get involved in that, then you get into modern science again, because the more we expect our technology always to work and to control the world for us, the more we're falling into that magical ambition.
We live in feminist.
Well, we've done symbolism now. We've done education, done the recess at Bellum. Okay.
Well, when I was talking to James, and I'm actually pretty good friends with him now. Like, he came to Cairns a little while ago, and we ended up catching up for beers, and that was just fantastic. Like, having beers with an Aristotle, with one of Australia's leading philosophers. That's like, people would pay money for that. It was kind of cool. And he shouted too, which made it even better. But anyway, we live in feminist times, and the rise of the female, which is no bad thing, of course, it's a fantastic thing, but we're getting a strange aspect of femininity that's rising and that's asserting itself, and a strange pattern that's playing out. So rather than the loving, nurturing, secretive side of femininity, we're getting like this crazy, weird, child-eating harpy witch. Like, what? Seriously,
I think you've said it. You've described it. So I mean, it's the same sort of problem. Now I can't remember whether we actually said it, whether I was thinking it. That without Christ, we end up in the diabolical always, and the modern feminists that are rejecting our relationship with God. It begins with people like Mary Daly. In my story, it begins with people like Mary Daly, who was actually a theology professor at Boston College. Not quite sure how, but anyway, and her book on Beyond God the Father and gynecology and things like that. And she was showing how Mary, as she was understood in the Catholic tradition, was, well, one, a rape victim. Mary Daly loved saying that. And that this patriarchal religion was damaging for women.
oh my God, that's so blasphemous. That is so blasphemous.
40 years on, I was reading her books when I was in college. So, 70s and 80s. I was in college in the 80s, and her books came out in 70s and 80s. We can see sometime later the long-term effects of that sort of thinking, right? You end up with no families because you deny the sanctity of motherhood. You end up with women who are very, very lonely, with no husbands, dysfunctional communities, children who are miserable. I mean, if you want the proof of the problem, it's in the stresses that we're under in our culture right now. Absolutely.
But it's just weird. is Mary the right framework and understanding of femininity? And I know that's like, you know, we're going to get in trouble for talking about this because it's like,
I'm I'm in as much trouble as I invite.
oh yeah, you're in more trouble than Flash Gordon on the planet Mongo, Prof. Hey, like fair dinkum, I don't know how. I don't know how you're still tenured because they were coming for you.
Well, that's actually the point of tenure is, you know, that I can try out stuff that other people might not want to say.
Yeah, they were coming for you. I was like, oh, they're out after this lady.
Well, mainly because I say stuff like this, you know, I worship our Lord Jesus Christ, which is hard to say in modern academia, because that, you know, it's considered. I mean, the first position that people take in that is, oh, you must be stupid,
Yeah.
which I'm happy to say doesn't tend to hold much. It doesn't last very long if you talk to me, I hope. So since they can't say I'm dumb, they have to say I'm crazy, because who would have faith in, you know, our Lord Jesus Christ when we know from the Enlightenment that's all bunk and nonsense. So right, that so with Mary, I talked about this in I think the 2 videos I did with Jonathan. We came up with, both of us, thinking about Mary first and foremost as a problem for women is completely missing the point. She's not you know, sort of not simply a model for women. She's a model for all humanity in our relationship with God, and that she is the temple in which God becomes present to us. And we're about, you know, this is a Christmas episode, so we're thinking about that the incarnation is God's entering into the world through her, and in the proper. I've actually set this up better than I might have expected, right? Reading the Old Testament and the New Testament together, as we need to do in order to understand the mystery properly. In the Old Testament, we see the Israelites in the, you know, worshiping Yahweh, the Lord, in the temple. And, you know, there's certain preparations that they have to make in order for the high priest to even go into the temple, because it's such a, you know, holy place. And in that temple, particularly in the Holy of Holies, there's the Ark, which is considered the throne. There's the mercy seat where the Lord sits. And those images are how we actually understand Mary in the long Christian tradition, in the Orthodox and the Coptic and the Ethiopian. Ethiopia says they have the Ark, right? But they also, you know, say that's Mary. That long-term tradition of seeing Mary as, I mean, the vessel, but it's you're saying it's the vessel for the entry of God into his creation. So it's this enormous, magnificent, if you will, artifact of creation. That she's woman is dignifying to humanity, not simply to women. That God takes on flesh in her and becomes, you know, incarnate as a man. All of worrying about this as simply patriarchal or as feminist is radically missing the point of the mystery.
Yeah, it is.
It's not even dealing with it. I mean, it's a bad story level, if nothing else.
It is totally and utterly missing the point, and that is the best way of articulating it. But to give critics of Christianity their due, and you know, when we talk about Christianity, I mean, it's such a broad church. I suspect it was, and I mean, no disrespect to the Protestant or, you know, our Protestant or evangelical cousins, but I suspect that it's their ignoring of her place that did lead to what appeared to be an overemphasis on the patriarchal aspect of the father. And so to give the devil his due, I think some of the accusations against some aspects of Christianity about being overly masculine, the overly masculine experience of him. I think that there's some truth to that. And I think it's because you can't have Christianity without Mary. It's just not complete. It's just not.
Well, I definitely agree with that. But yes, the Protestantism destabilizes the mystery because it focuses solely on the text. I mean, if we do the sort of sola scriptura, which isn't actually accurate, but you know, that you're worrying primarily about the interpretation of the word, it misses the significance that the word is chosen. Those texts that are in the Bible we focus on in reading are there because they're a part of the worship, they're a part of the liturgy. And the liturgy, as I've just been describing, is modeled on the ancient temple practice, and the ark is at the center of that ancient temple practice. It's like, well, you're not missing just the human beings in the story, Mary and Jesus. You're missing the entire architecture of the Christian mystery if you don't acknowledge that the temple is a piece of it.
I know.
And then I'd say, so what happens in, for the English speaking world, what happens in the Reformation in the 16th century is, first Henry VIII steals all the property of the monasteries. So you lose the spiritual practice, you lose the prayer practice. And then a year or so later, 1538, they collect up all the statues of Mary and burn them. And, losing that cult in the proper sort of sense of devotional context for caring about, the meaning of the stories. It's we're still living with it today. The reverberations of the sterility that you get when you throw the mother out is quite significant.
Yeah, sterility. And that word, again, just nails it on so many different levels when you talk about that. Can we dive specifically into your work? Can you tell me about Mary and the Art of Prayer?
So that's a book it's like, if you want to learn to pray, you need the Hours of the Virgin. And this was the book that, one is sort of the origins of European literacy is in the desire to pray the Psalms, which are the center, the core of this monastic practice. By the later Middle Ages, anybody who could read the Hours of the Virgin, because that's the text they learned to read. So there's, they're talking about Protestantism and the Reformation. It comes out of a desire to have access to this prayer practice. But the mystery of it is, it's like everywhere. It's a sort of McLuhan-y thing. It's the medium is everywhere. These books of hours are everywhere. But there've been no scholarship on what the practice was like. There's scholarship on the particular books, like they're very beautiful. They have pretty pictures in them and things. But what I wanted to do in Mary and the Art of Prayer was say, okay, what was it like for medieval Christians praying these texts in praise of Our Lady? And Mary and the Art of Prayer is sort of it's like a handbook it's a handbook with commentary on the imagery that's contained in the Hours of the Virgin, so that by the end of the book, you can understand why medieval Christians told the miracle stories that they did about what happens when you pray to Our Lady, that, that you can understand why they concentrate so much on her physical beauty. You can understand, hopefully, why they look to her for intercession in the way that they do. That Mary and the Art of Prayer was my handbook for the modern world on what this medieval practice was actually like.
Yeah. And that's, again, what the practice was like, what the incarnation meant, what it meant to do and feel and experience these things, rather than going back to what we said at the beginning. How does that work in the abstract? Going back to that. Yeah, it's kind of like, and that's what we've lost. Like, the part of Australia I live in is far north Queensland. I live in Cairns, and I don't use this word lightly, Prof. Like, there is an almost worship of Indigenous people over here. Like, worship. They are worshipped. Like, just so, your normal Murray people just walk around. It's like, oh, thank you for coming to our events. And you can't do anything. There is no public event that is held without recognition of the traditional owners. And thank you for being here and on your land and all this kind of stuff. And the rights and the wrongs of that is, how real that is, how good it is for the country and all these things. I'm not even going to discuss any of those issues. But what it says to me is, like, I'm a Catholic. I know ritual when I see it. I know spiritual hunger when I see it. That's spiritual hunger. And it's because Australia, especially, like, this is a barren country, like, in every sense of the word. It's such a barren country. It's dry. Well, not my part of Australia, but most of Australia is dry. Most of it, it's a harsh, dry place. And spiritually, we've always been a harsh, dry people. Well, the first thing the Americans did, as soon as the Pilgrim Fathers did when they hit land, they had a mass. It's like they thanked God. The first, the Australians didn't have a mass until like 3 or 4 days afterwards. They just got straight to building stuff. Like, build those tents, do this. It's like,
Well, Well, I mean, you all, so it's Australia. This is my co-host in my Mosaic Arc podcast. She, I said she lives in your part of the planet. Um, we talk about this both as Australia in its it's disconnected from the rest of the Eurasian story for so long, is in dream time so much. And you say
It's
that the
so
ritual
true.
element's there, but it's very dream time. But what the sort of non-indigenous population is been co-opted into this, we as we talk about on the Mosaic Arc, it's this pirate economy of the Anglo Empire. So you're basically a big shopping mall, which is the problem of have that terrible spiritual hunger. And you see, for Catholics, I mean, this is I'm happy that I grew up Presbyterian, I'm Catholic now. I'm on this great journey to find, as you're saying, the roots in worship, which the modern world rejected. And I think we can feel it now in the United States when we don't have it. But what I know from my friend Kiltz, that in Australia, it's even harder to feel it. You're so simply commercial.
And it's so dry.
Yeah.
You can see it, like they just can't, like it's a ritual. It's a prayer. Like this walk, this acknowledging country, that's prayer. It's a secular prayer in all, but
right.
It is such a prayer. And I'm sitting there and you can see them, like people get right into it. Like I used to go to some of these meetings and this one lady, she would nearly weep saying this, and I can feel the elders around me and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, I mean, fair enough. I mean, I believe a Jew executed by the Romans 2,000 years ago was the Son of God. So like, I'm really in no position to throw stones. But I kind of like, if she had talked about anything Christian or, spoken about having a Christian rapture or something like that, people would be like, oh my, take her away, get that woman medicated right now, poor thing. But like, that was actually kind of celebrated. People were like, yes. And I'm just like, it's so odd that this, and you saw in the Black Lives Matter things too. Like I saw people, they would walk along, they would stop, they would kneel, they would chant, they would get up and stop, they'd kneel and chant. I'm going, I've seen this before.
Yes,
I've seen this before. I know a little bit.
No, it's a real spiritual hunger. You can definitely see that. And it's interesting for us Anglos, the English speaking world, to, I said, Henry VIII stole the property of the monasteries and burned all the statues of Mary. And what we're looking for is, so you say a Jew executed by the Romans. I in my journey realized that we need, one of the things that was always hard for me just as a historian, it's like, why here and now, right? Why is Jesus born here and now in the Roman Empire? The Roman Empire in that period, when Jesus is born into that, he's God, he chooses his moment. Well, the Romans are in control of that region. It's been under the control of Greek rulers for some time, which is why the scriptures are in Greek and the Septuagint. It's the great crossroads of the ancient Near East. It's Jerusalem sits there between the land and the sea, between the Mediterranean and the steppes. It's the center of this, the whole complex of ancient civilization between Egypt and the various ramifications of what Babylon is. And so but Jesus, when he's incarnate, is from Galilee, right? So he's outside of the central Judean, obviously nobility, and comes therefore from a city that was at the center of the Hellenistic commercial routes as well, right? Caesarea Philippi. So it's like Jesus is taking on everything, and that's why the banner that Pilate has put over the cross is in the three languages.
Yeah,
because it is there, it's all three. And that immediately I mentioned, I love talking about Ethiopia right now for lots of reasons, having to do with some of the things we're talking about on the Mosaic Arc, but that one of the very first Christians, formally speaking, is the eunuch from Ethiopia, who is there in Jerusalem reading the prophecy of Isaiah, and Philip sees him and baptizes him, saying, this is fulfilled now. So the Ethiopian church from Africa, the Greeks that Paul and the others missionized to, the apostles spread everywhere. Christianity makes sense as the anchor of human history.
Can you tell us about the Dragon Common Room?
Oh, yes. So that's my poetry workshop. It started as a sort of open chat on Telegram, which is a social media platform, but it's very useful media place where you can have like running conversations with people. It's quite good. Dragons, well, the dragons are a lot of layers, I think, because I'm, trying to rescue fantasy for Christianity. That I also teach a course on J.R.R. Tolkien, the Lord of the Rings, regularly, and the understanding the desire for the mythological is obviously one of the things that Tolkien tapped into. So the Dragon Common Room, it's meant to be like a common room as in an Oxbridge College, like this, where you gather and have conversations. And I mean, the layers of how we ended up writing iambic pentameter, that I'm not sure I can briefly narrate them, but the product of it is we're working on the third poem of our project so far. We did one poem called Centrism Games, which is a modern satire on the quest for fame and what people will sacrifice in order to do that. The second book we did was a children's book called Aurora Borealis, which if you need Christmas presents, you can buy it in Australia. It's a wonderful animal adventure, and the animals in Aurora Borealis find the Southern Cross because they go from the North Pole to the South Pole, or from the North Pole to Antarctica in quest of the aurora, which is shown to have Christological significance in the story. And then the current project we're doing is it's a Elizabethan style fairy queen modeled poem. It's like the Fairy Queen meets New Atlantis. It's the style of poem that Edmund Spenser wrote in honor of Queen Elizabeth I, mixed with the mythology of science that Francis Bacon came up with in his New Atlantis, to show the way in which in modernity we're trapped in this alchemical spell that we've said. The poem is called Draco Alchemicus, and we're trapped in this alchemical spell of serving the dragon rather than serving Christ. So it's another Christian adventure, but with a somewhat darker than the Aurora Borealis for the kids.
Right. Can I go off onto, and this is unscripted too, but if you don't know, you don't know. If you're not wanting to discuss it,
you didn't send me a script. You're making it sound like we had a plan. We have no plan. We're not even in dream time. We're anchoring dream time to Christ, right? So here we are.
It's funny you should say that, because I spent a lot of time up Cape York, and anyone who says they know anything, they know Indigenous spirituality is delusional. But I'm kind of like a servant looking through a crack in the door into the room where the people are doing stuff. And I had a fair bit of exposure to it in a lot of different ways. And I'm pretty good friends with the priest who serves Cape York, God bless him, Father Rob, who does tune in sometimes. G'day, Father. And he always used to get up me because I was kind of like, we've got to be more Catholic. It's about us. It's about us, kind of like, and he goes, Matt, you're kind of not getting it. Like, we can't impose things on people. It's got to be what they're used to. But the other thing is, and he said this to me years ago, and I kind of didn't believe him, but now he was right, and he gets it. He goes, all of these things were pointing towards Christ. Right. The Dreamtime stories are just amazing. Like, all of these things, like the serpent isn't satanic. Like the rainbow serpent isn't Satan. That's not the symbolism there. You've missed the point. And all of these, and some of the stuff about Indigenous spirituality too, because there's these concepts of awus and all these other stuff, which I could literally talk about for some time. He goes, they're all real in the same way that leprechauns and all these other guys, like, you're Irish. He goes, they're all real in a certain sense and a certain level. And that's that's what we've got to play on, because it's different for your urban Indigenous people. Like they'd be sitting there shaking their heads at this because kind of like,
well, they become part of what Kiltz has called the vending machine. The more urban. I mean, the Christianity is an urban religion, so you don't get to just say we only get it in the countryside. It's like Jerusalem is the city, but the modern cities have become vending machine. Did you go to the vending machine and buy your choice of the same things the world over?
I suppose
But your father Rob is right. So Roy Borealis, you should show him it and see what he thinks about our griffin.
Can I do your, and I've got some more questions, and I'd actually like to run to kind of like explain the spirituality thing a little bit more. Rather than articulate it, I'll tell a story, which I think is it. But is there a way of doing that course that you were talking about online? Because like looking at that, I kind of thought, oh, is this an online course that you can do your Tolkien course? Like, are all of your lectures online that we can just kind of follow? Are they there?
Yeah, they are. They're on. So the Tolkien lectures are on a subscription platform called unauthorized.tv. And if you look at the Dragon Common Room website with the poetry and such, there's links to the Mosaic Ark videos on unauthorized TV as well. But the Mosaic Ark videos are also on YouTube. But my Tolkien course, there's 42 lectures in that one, and it's sort of still it's not finished, right? I never got to the Lord of the Rings. It's mainly the Silmarillion, but all of this, it's on those unauthorized lectures, and it's not very expensive to subscribe. It's like $7 for a month, and you can watch as many videos as you want. And there's not just my videos. There's other people who also have content there.
So yeah, thanks. And I'll be all over that. And I recommend people do jump on.
You can subscribe, get them all, download them, and then it's like you can buy the whole set for $7 if you download them all in a month.
Yeah, do the course.
Yeah.
Believe me, I'll be doing it. So I was in the Queensland Police for 30 years, and formerly I was the officer in charge of a place called Cohen, which is pretty much in the centre really of Cape York. It's where Cape York proper begins. And we went to a missing person job where a young Indigenous girl went missing in quite suspicious circumstances. I can't comment too much on that because the coroner's case hasn't been completed yet, other than to say that the coroner is still making ongoing inquiries, and I know the Queensland Police Service are as well. But there was something that kind of like intrigued me about that job, because there was kind of like the circumstances where the person of interest was a Caucasian person and the missing person was an Indigenous lady. And I was always wondering why is there no comeback on this guy? Like, what's going on? Because the girl was from out of town, and frankly, I was expecting a troop carrier full of young men from the town that this missing girl was from to turn up in the wee hours of the morning and kick 7 shades of shit out of this guy and, be lucky to leave him alive. There's something going on. And I knew enough to know that there was some proper Murray stuff going on. Sorry, Murray is the Indigenous word for Indigenous person. There was some proper Murray stuff going on. And I'm putting the feelers out, and I'm like, and people knew that I knew that something was going on. But they kind of like, after a while, I had a lady come sliding up to me. Go, oh, Matt, I got to talk to you about what's going on. Oh, okay, good. And she said, and I said, how come there's been no payback? How come, what's going on? And why are people not really helping the police as much with their inquiries as perhaps they, and I don't mean that this is actually coming up the coroner's case. I don't mean that in a, you didn't help. No, it's like,
right.
It's kind of like, kind of asking some things and, a bit slow and getting back to us, and wanted to do these things and you didn't give us, what's going on? I said, Matt, that girl, she Awu. And Awu is a spirit, a guardian spirit of a location. But they're kind of like, it's like the hierarchy in some sense. It's like the hierarchy of angels. So like you'll have at any location, and any place will have its guardians, its guardian spirits, although they may have been chased away, or if their songs aren't being sung, they'll leave, they'll die, because their existence is linked to the songs being sung. And if the songs aren't being sung and the rituals isn't being done, those spirits either die or leave that place. They cease to be incarnated, But so you'll have some places that'll have like spirits that existed before humanity that were created that guard that place. You're probably thinking angels, but it's kind of not like that. It's a bit more than that. You'll also have animal spirits who are linked to those locations. But you'll have the spirits of the elders and people who die around there and become intrinsically linked to that place. And around Cohen and around some of the other language groups around there, because it varies, 400 kilometers away, it's different yet again. But so she became, the idea was that she'd been drawn out because she wasn't in her country. She'd been drawn out and subsumed into the dream time for that place. And she will ever be part of that story and forever be there. But it's not her country, so it's not like a positive thing. Like she's probably an angry guardian spirit who's really unhappy about being there, who was kind of like tricked by her elders. It'd be like this, so she ran away from the location where she was. Mm-hmm. That happened both physically and spiritually. So it happened in both senses of the word. So we know that she ran away. And the way it was explained to me by the people who were guiding me about what happened, is that she was like, they saw her, the old people, spirits saw her and they called her out. It's like, come. And they drew her further and further and further and further and further away so that she was completely kind of like disconnected. It's like, whoa, like, where am I? So she was lost, in the sense of the word, like lost physically, lost spiritually, like lost. And they probably gave her what normally happens is she ate some bad mai, some bad food. She's taken some food in, and that started the transformation into becoming, she was subsumed. And again, because I gave evidence. I was explaining this to a lawyer. It's so funny because she's an Indigenous lawyer too. She's like just staring at me. The poor girl, she's actually from North Queensland too. But I could tell she just wasn't getting it. So she's an R word. And this girl's going, what? Well, I thought you. Anyway. So, she's been subsumed. I said it would be like the least worst example I could give would be like the assumption of the Virgin Mary into heaven. It's a bit more than that, but that's kind of like what it has. She's been subsumed into the dream time. And
I'm going to explore this. I'm going to have to learn more about this.
Oh yeah, it's kind of.
Well, yeah. So what you were saying when you started talking about the Indigenous people and how do you call yourselves, Anglos?
Actually, I'm actually mixed race, but if you want to if you want to play by the rules of the weirdos who want to categorize human beings by immutable characteristics rather than the content of their character.
Yes.
I'm kind of like, yeah.
Well, they're different ethnicities, right? That Catholic missionaries used to understand, and I think maybe still do better than Protestants.
Yeah, we get it.
That you participate with the culture. I mean, it's even the way that the Anglo-Saxons themselves were missionized back in the 6th and 7th centuries when Gregory the Great sends Augustine to Canterbury, and they understand that you are transforming understanding within the stories that people, so that that we have written Old English at all, the dragons and Beowulf and things like that, is because the medieval missionaries understood the difference between erase all previous culture and plant this sterile vending machine on top, versus drawing out from the people themselves the beauty of their own existence. We as English speakers should definitely understand how to incorporate multiplicity of ethnos in our worship of Christ.
That's right. And what I began to understand was it's bringing those spiritual understandings, which frankly, I don't mean this in a bad way, but a low resolution. into a resolution. It's like, well, this is what that meant. This is what that was pointing to. This is what this was. This is where
Right.
they're going. You know, and likening these kind of like, yeah, you know,
Yes.
yeah, it's kind of like, and not only does that work, so it's practical, but it's true. Like, it's true.
Well, this is you say, you know, how many layers, how many levels have I gotten in trouble in academia? That in Mary and the Art of Prayer, what I was trying to do was that for medieval Christian devotion, showing it as a spiritual truth which modernity does not want to look at. Henry VIII burned had the statues burned. Maybe his counselors like
Yeah,
Cromwell and
it wasn't
such,
so much him. Yeah, yeah.
well, kind of
I mean,
let
look,
them
he
or
went along with
encouraged
it.
them. And they
He went
stole
along.
everything. He totally went along with it because he wanted to have a new
Yeah,
wife.
he wanted to stuff and he wanted to shag. That's all that was about. It was,
Yeah. That's the effect of sin. You lose contact with the spiritual realities. There you go. I mean, and that's that it's you know, modernity is, insofar as it's desiring its own glorification and aggrandizement, always about that bargain you've made with Satan for power, which is a little bit what we were trying to do in the Dragon Common Room. Our first poem, these are book length poems, like, you know, 100 pages or so. They're little stories. The first poem, the Centrism Games, is about those sorts of bargains that people make in Hollywood, in politics, in, you know, the priesthood. It's the lady priest. She gets her own by the end of that episode. And yeah, so I think, you know, there's a positive version of Christianity that, you know, I think in the long term is the Catholic one, which is responding to indigenous cultures as aspects of the truth that we're participating in rather than enemies.
exactly. And it took me, frankly, to my mea culpa, mea maximum culpa. It actually took me a while to, you know, to understand and respect that. And I'm getting now, like even now, and the time I've spent in the Cape is not inconsiderable. I'm still learning, like just so much. You know what I mean? What drew you into the medieval studies? Like, why did you choose medieval studies? Like, I mean,
Well, so
I mean,
this is the other thing that got me in trouble with the Mary and the Art of Prayer. I said Mary chose me, so there you go. The historical version of the story is I here in my mom's basement, which is where I was living when I was in high school, not the basement, the house. And I had a very good Latin teacher in high school, and so when I went to college, I meant to be studying, you know, mathematics and physics, because I was at the strong engineering school, Rice University, which is in Houston. But I had this Latin background, and I started taking Latin classes in medieval Latin, and then I started taking some history classes in medieval history. And I had a wonderful teacher in my third and fourth year in college that did courses on medieval women in the history of Christianity. I did a lot of scriptures, and by the end of that, I was a history and religious studies major, no longer a math and physics major. However, I've realized over my long career, all of that mattered, right? I've say many times that to understand Mary, you have to know everything. She's the patroness in the 13th century in the University of Paris of the Faculty of Arts, right? That if we want to understand our, you know, role in creation, we have to have science and arts and all of that. So I don't know. I mean, I feel to say I felt guided, it's more, you know, I also make the joke that every time I try to do scholarship that takes me away from Mary, it just dries up. It goes sterile. There's nothing to say. And when I find the thing that I think I am clearly somehow meant to be thinking about, it blossoms. So I don't know. I was shown the path and I had to take it, and when I didn't take that path, nothing good happened.
do you think an understanding and a reinvigoration of, and I'll even use the word cult, the Mary cult.
Well, cultivation, it's art, it's culture, of course. Yes, it will bring back fertility and art. How's that?
It's that
The
simple.
cult of Mary, it's like we think about culture, we think about agriculture. Without these proper relationship with you know, creation, we're sterile and non-productive.
How can we bring back this medieval concept to the modern mind and sell it? Like,
Pray the Psalms. Pray the Psalms. It's all in the Psalms. And it's the prayer practice that we've gotten back around to, medieval England Christianity was grounded in the monasteries that are founded first by Augustine coming to Canterbury and then Bede in Northumbria. Insofar as a culture is Christian, it is praying the Psalms, and the Psalms carry all of this. They carry the praise of our Creator. They carry the image of the Lord whom we worship. They show us the penance that we should engage in, and when we fall away from that worship. And what you said about the Indigenous people, we sing.
The sing.
It has to.
I was just about to say that. It's the same thing. It's worship, but it's
worship.
The most beautiful worship. And like, if you've ever been in an Indigenous ceremony and they all start singing, and the dances start, and it's like you can feel there's something there. It's like, whoa. The first time,
but it needs to. I mean, when you're describing
stuff, dude. It's like, whoa, it's genuinely scary. It's like, what is going on here? What is manifesting? Like, is this good? Is this bad? Like, where do I stand with this? What's my relationship with this thing? It's like, whoa, it scares the shit out of me. Honestly, Prof.
Well, as it should, because it is in fact, so going back to Mary and the temple worship, those Psalms are written for the temple worship. They have this similar effect. They're that powerful. So we sing the songs that we are meant to be trained to sing in, and that, I mean, that's where the culture came from in the first place, that worship.
Wow. It's that simple.
It's that simple.
Fantastic. Look, I think I've sucked up so much of your time and I'm really enjoying this. I think that'll be a great point to wrap it up. Is there any other quick points that you want to make?
I like ending with singing the Psalms. That's a very good place to end. And it goes back to the beginning that we were talking about. It's like, why was I fencing bear at prayer? I wanted to understand what it was like to pray those Psalms.
Wow.
So, yeah.
It's the circle.
all of it. And it also answers your symbolism question, because the symbolism is what shows you this resonance. It's a musical term, right? It's the folding in of all of these patterns and associations into our understanding of the mystery that we're participating in.
But even the language and the beautiful thing about now, we can actually have this, like if you had said the phrase, and well, you know this better than me, the mystery that we're all participating in to a materialist, they still stare at you. Those poor bastards. Like I used to get angry with the new atheists. But I've really transcended that now. Actually, I know this is a weird thing to say. I see them as allies. I genuinely see them as allies because they're on the right path. Like there's this, beautiful New Testament phrase, whether you're cold, whether you're hot, I can swallow you. But if you're lukewarm, I will spit you out. You think of what that means. No, but think.
I think, to be atheist,
there's a place for heaven in Dawkins. There's a place for Dawkins in heaven. Because he might be cold, he might be hot, he's not lukewarm.
Well, that I accept.